Hello, I'm Shamira Hapitana, and this is Just Press Play. Here we talk about life, faith, culture, and how these things affect us as Christ followers. So I hope that you're all strapped in and you're all well and thriving in the midst of these very strange and difficult times. Speaking of strange and difficult, how do you wrap your brains around our times? How do you get on these days? Ngayong July marks the 16th month since the world made a huge turn, and although medyo nasasanay na tayo sa panibago nating setup, there are times when it still would not sink in. And of course, along with that comes the struggles of coming to grips with our new reality. And without being melodramatic about it, things can get really unnerving and overwhelming at times, diba? And ako, when it feels like my mind is stuck in a gloomy loop, I find comfort in stories. But not just any kind of story. I always go with those that I'm familiar with and my redemption. So aside from Bible stories, I gravitate towards series na excellent and uplifting, and one of them ay yung Chronicles of Narnia. I first encountered this story in 2005 when Walden Media made a film adaptation of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And then after that, I tried reading all 7 books of the series and finished it. And during that time then, nag-release yung Hollywood ng 2 other films of the 2 other books in the series, yung Prince Caspian and the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And then, eventually, I got a hold of yung Focus on the Family's audio theater version of the series. And that's the one that I've gone back to time and again, especially when I need to see Jesus from a different perspective. You know, when I find myself feeding my mind with negative thoughts or just about to feed my mind with that, or when I'm doing things na hindi kailangan masyado mag-isip and so my mind is open to such things, I just turn it on and just listen to it and just let myself get lost once again in the wonderful world of Narnia. Each of the 7 books of this series outlines a different story dun sa world na yon. So, yung first one, The Magician's Nephew, is the one that sets up the whole thing. So, it talks about how Narnia came to be. The second book is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the one that we're all familiar with when you talk about this series by C.S. Lewis. It starts off with the story of the Pevensey children who got sent off to the countryside because of the bombings in London. And their parents wanted them to be safe from that. So, yung mga children at that time, they were being sent away, and so they're one of those families, and it was in that country home that they found their way into a wardrobe that led them to Narnia. The third book is the Horse and His Boy, and it talks about yung further adventures nila in Narnia as they reigned as kings and queens. Tapos they came back. Doon naman sa Prince Caspian, it talks about this prince was working on getting his position, but then it also talks about yung pagbuhay ng reality ng magic sa Narnia na at that point people thought na medyo non-existent na kasi it happened thousands of years after nung events ng The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And then came the Voyage of the Dawn Treader na naging king na si Prince Caspian, and he was trying to right the wrongs of his predecessors. Then there's the Silver Chair, and it talks about yung them trying to find yung lost son ni Prince Caspian who was under pala an enchanted the bewitchment of an enchanted chair by their enemy. And then the last battle, na dito na nagko-culminate yung story ng Narnia, and every one of the major characters from book 1 to book 7 ay nandun bumalik sa Narnia. So in all of these books, we see mirrors of human experience and biblical truths carefully crafted in mythology, in time travel, and multiverse. So if this is your thing, definitely dig into it. And in all of them, we see an underlying pattern. They were adventures of children who encountered Aslan, and Aslan used them in order to right certain wrongs in his country. So aside from language, aside from imagery and story, what makes this masterpiece timeless and culturally transcendent para sa akin ay yung main characters niya, yung children. The genius of this series is that it doesn't see them, the children and childhood, as something to be dismissed or something that we should all get over with. They were children whose early lives were momentarily interrupted by family trials, by war, and by the aftermaths of the war. And so they, along with the adults, had to find a way to cope with these life-changing challenges as well. Instead of childhood being that easily forgettable point in one's life, it was for them a focal point where they all learned something and they took that away with them as they carried on in life. So, ano yung mga insights about childhood that we see from this series? Number one, we see that wonder is a mark of a child. All too often, when we no longer count ourselves as children, we seldom get amazed. Parang yung amazement or yung wonder ay confined to childhood. And so, along the way, parang nalulusan natin yung genuine appreciation for how things happen. Maybe because we think that we know the full picture or we know the story behind and we just take things for granted. I don't know, but not with a child. When something remarkable happens to children, they don't explain it away. They just take these things and enjoy them. Another thing that we see is that children easily believe. Trust, kumbaga, is their default. They do not think first of distancing themselves from something when they perceive it even remotely as a threat. Well, that happens later on when disappointments and indoctrination happen, but for the innocent, belief is instinctual. They cannot help it. It's what they do automatically. Also, we see that children are carefree. For some reason, children are more able to forget their cares, or they're not that thoroughly overwhelmed by them. And so because of this, they're able to be more generous towards others. They're able to accept people and things more freely and adjust to situations more graciously. So, wonder, faith, grace. Through this series, we rediscover childhood and we see these gems and the beauty that they offer for the rest of life. As a side note, ganito na lang yung pagpapahalaga ni C.S. Lewis sa childlike character in approaching the world, that in the last book, actually, not everyone from books 1 to 7 were able to get back to Narnia. There was one person who got left behind, and that was Susan. And so when the characters, nung nandun na sila sa Narnia and nag-uusap sila, bakit hindi nakasama si Susan sa kanila? Ang sabi nila, it's because Susan got caught up with being all grown up to the point that she was actually mocking or denying their childhood experiences in Narnia. Sad, di ba? But we just hope na there is space for her to turn around and to right her wrongs. So, yeah, that's Narnia. And it is a lot to teach us about children and childhood and the beauties that they bring to life. And you know who else thinks that there's something to be learned from children? Jesus. In the Gospels, we see him interacting with kids. His disciples at one point, they wanted to shoo away yung mga bata or stop the people from bringing the kids to him, but Jesus Christ stopped them and he said that the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. And at another time, na nagtatalo yung mga disciples about who the greatest in the kingdom would be, Jesus Christ said that unless they were to become like the children, they wouldn't be considered great in his kingdom. And so we see that Jesus affirms both the worth of children and yung lessons na makukuha natin from looking at their example. Narnia and these other stories that we loved growing up, especially those that are built around God's truth, are indispensable sources of encouragement in times like these. They are not just stories that tickle our imagination, but they're stories that offer insights into living life fully. As we grow old, we cannot go on with life and think that these things are just kidding or they're about being children only. On the other hand, we cannot revisit these stories and think that we are just kidding when we begin to take their lessons seriously. These stories should not be confined to our childhood, nor should they be considered as only being playful. These stories should be much more to us because that child in us does not and must not die. And as we move along, we hold on to that child in us in order to live with less indifference, cynicism, and rigidity, but with more wonder, faith, and grace. So how does being a child or having that child inside sit with you? Have you ever considered living life with this in mind? So what can you do in the next few days in order to let this inner child shine and so live life better? Again, this is Just Press Play, and you can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Again, it's Just Press Play PH. If you want to be prayed for, if there's something off of your chest that you want off of your chest, you want someone to talk to, you can just send us a message or email at justpressplayph@gmail.com. Again, justpressplayph@gmail.com. This is Shamira Kapitana, and I'm wishing you all wonder, faith, and grace. And with Aslan's breath, we can and will know him by another name here. And that name is Jesus. God bless you all.